Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what he didn't spell out is this: in love, the unconscious doesn't just guide you, it guides him too. Have you ever felt like you were quietly replaced? As if your love, your presence, was no longer enough to keep someone close. One morning, he still texts you, "I miss you. You're the best thing in my life." And just days later, silence, no reason, no explanation, no reply. And you start to panic. You ask yourself, what did I do wrong? You text, you plead, you demand closure. But the more you do, the further he pulls away, and you can't understand why. Carl Jung would call this a psychological reversal. The more you chase with reason, the more his unconscious responds with retreat. Because the unconscious doesn't move by logic, it moves by feeling, contrast, and absence. This is what no one teaches many women. That when you go silent, when you pull back, when you return to yourself, something primal begins to stir inside a man's unconscious. It's the fear of losing the internal image known as the anima. It's the instinctive reaction to the sudden disappearance of a familiar emotional presence. And deeper still, it's the shadow he has long refused to face, now whispering, "Why doesn't she need me anymore?" You don't need to chase. You don't need explanations. You only need to understand the unconscious principles Jung revealed. What you resist persists. The more compulsively you pursue something, the more it eludes you. And the most beautiful part is this: when you stop, it doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've shifted the psychological balance in him. You don't need to pull him back. His own unconscious will do it for you. Part 1. Every attempt to cling only strengthens his unconscious decision to leave. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious mind is not merely a hidden part of the psyche. It is the true director behind most of our decisions, emotions, and actions. What we call intuition, gut feeling, or sudden disinterest is often nothing more than the voice of the unconscious, quietly making moves long before the conscious mind catches up. So here's the hard truth, sister. When you chase him, when you beg, when you try to fix what's broken through words, explanations, or desperate affection, you are not changing his mind. You are confirming his unconscious decision to pull away. Let's be brutally honest. Every time you double text, every time you explain your worth, every time you ask him to reconsider, you are telling his shadow, "She still needs me more than I need her." And the unconscious loves patterns. If his inner psyche has already begun withdrawing, for reasons he may not fully understand, then your clinginess doesn't challenge it, it validates it. Jung called this the principle of reinforcement through resistance. What you resist persists. Which means, the more you resist his silence, the more powerful his distance becomes. Not because he's cruel, not because he's playing games, but because the unconscious is responding to a perceived imbalance, a one-sided flow of energy. When someone is always present, always available, always seeking, the unconscious begins to devalue that presence. Imagine trying to hold on to someone slipping away in water. The tighter you grip, the more they twist and pull and push against you. And eventually, what remains is not closeness, but suffocation. Carl Jung also believed that within every person lies a deep instinct for individuation, a natural urge to separate, to grow, to differentiate. So when he feels your energy collapsing into his, losing yourself in him, a silent alarm goes off. A man who feels unconsciously responsible for another's identity, Jung implied, feels trapped, not desired, because love cannot bloom where autonomy is absent. When you beg for love, you become less of a mirror and more of a magnet. But magnets can repel just as easily as they attract, especially when the polarity is imbalanced. And yet, here's the most painful part. When you chase, his conscious mind may feel flattered, but his unconscious mind begins to recoil. He can't explain why, but you suddenly feel too much, too available, too emotional. You've become a symbol of dependence, and the unconscious fears dependency more than it fears loneliness. So what happens next? He rationalizes his distance. He rewrites the story in his mind. She's too intense. I don't feel the spark anymore. I need space. But what he's really saying, without knowing, is, her need for me makes me feel less free. And the more you try to fix it, the more the narrative solidifies. Jung referred to this as the compensatory nature of the unconscious. If one part of the psyche becomes overactive, emotional dependence, the other part must suppress, emotional withdrawal, in order to restore balance. It's not logical, it's archetypal. So what's the antidote? Stillness, silence, pull back, not to punish, not to manipulate, but to release the pressure valve on his unconscious, to allow him to meet his own psyche without your energy clouding it. Jung once said, "Silence is not empty, it is full of answers." When you become silent, something extraordinary happens. The energy field between you recalibrates. Your absence becomes a mirror that shows him what he cannot see when you are present. The comfort of your presence, the weight of your attention, the stability of your love. But that reflection is only possible when you step away. Remember, the unconscious needs space to awaken. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. So if you've been trying, if you've been reaching out, explaining, justifying, hoping he'll get it, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, am I offering love or am I trying to earn worth? Because love given from lack always returns in lack. But love held in quiet self-respect becomes magnetic. Let him feel your absence. Let him wonder where your light went. Let his unconscious wander into the darkness he's avoided, only to discover, in that quiet void, the shape of you. You don't need to remind him of your worth. You only need to remember it yourself. And from that place of inner stillness, he will either wake up, or you will finally stop waiting for someone who was never ready to meet you fully. Either way, you win. Because now, you're not clinging, you're reclaiming. Silent action, but psychology calls it withdrawing energy from the reflective field. To the outside world, your silence may look like passivity, but in the language of depth psychology, especially Carl Jung's, silence is not absence. Silence is withdrawal of energy from what Jung called the reflective field. Let me explain. Every relationship creates a psychological field, an invisible space charged with expectations, projections, emotional exchanges, even fantasies. When you are constantly engaging, texting, explaining, checking his stories, waiting for replies, you are energetically feeding this field. You're keeping the circuit alive. And in that circuit, he can feel you, even when you don't speak. He knows you're still available. He feels your emotional gaze on him. And deep down, his unconscious becomes accustomed to your presence, even addicted to the certainty of your energy. Carl Jung wrote that, where your attention goes, your energy flows. That's not metaphor, that's psychology. The moment you stop engaging, not just in action, but in thought, you begin to pull your energy out of the reflective field, and something shifts. Suddenly, the mirror goes dark. The field goes cold. The dance between your two psyches is interrupted. This isn't silence. This is energetic severance. To a man's unconscious, this silence is louder than any confrontation. Because now, there is no longer a reflection. No one to respond to. No validation to rely on. He's left alone with himself. And here's the part most people miss. Jung believed that human beings are not addicted to people. They are addicted to the role they play in someone else's reflection. When you go quiet, you're not just vanishing. You're stripping him of his favorite mirror. Think about it. He was used to being admired by you, validated, desired, needed. Your presence allowed him to feel a certain identity. The one she loves, the one she waits for, the one she texts first. But when that energy stops flowing, the reflection disappears. He doesn't just feel your absence. He loses a part of how he sees himself. And that's what starts to sting. Jung referred to this dynamic as ego starvation through withdrawal of psychic attention. In simpler terms, when you stop projecting energy towards someone, their unconscious feels it as loss, even if they never truly acknowledged it as love. That's why silence is not weak. It is a disruption, an emotional recalibration, a shift in the magnetic polarity. But this only works when it's genuine. Silence, born from pain, still transmits pain. Silence used to provoke still carries the energy of need. But true energetic withdrawal, the kind that reclaims your own reflection instead of feeding his, is deeply felt. You are no longer offering your soul as a screen for his projections. You are no longer a character in his psychological story. You are stepping out of the play. And in doing so, you create one of the most powerful psychological experiences Jung described. The void isn't emptiness. It's the space where new truths emerge. It's where the other person starts asking, why isn't she reaching out? Has she moved on? Who is she becoming without me? And more importantly, why do I feel this sudden vacuum where her attention used to live? That question doesn't arise when you explain yourself. It doesn't come when you argue, plead, or try to be the bigger person. It only comes in the vacuum of true energetic silence. Because silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of shift. A subtle, unspoken announcement that says, I am no longer available in the same way, and you don't get to keep the same version of me if you didn't value her. So stop thinking silence makes you powerless. Carl Jung would tell you, it makes you sovereign. You're no longer orbiting his world. You're re-entering your own. And from that position, whole, undistracted, unprojected, you become what the unconscious cannot resist. An unanswered question. And human nature cannot stand unanswered questions. Part 3. You don't need a love strategy. You need to begin the journey of individuation. At some point, you will realize that love strategies don't work. The timing texts, the no-contact tricks, the mirror, posting on Instagram. They may stir some short-term reaction, but they don't touch the core. Because this isn't about winning him back. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned, trying to keep him. Carl Jung didn't talk about love in the way pop culture does. He didn't tell people how to attract a man or trigger desire. He taught something far more powerful and far more terrifying. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. This is not the time to manipulate his attention. This is the time to begin what Jung called the process of individuation, the journey of returning to the self. So what is individuation? It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you distorted yourself for love. It's the unraveling of all the false identities you've worn, the cool girl, the chill one, the always available, the healer, the one who understands. Individuation is coming home to the woman who no longer asks, how can I keep him? But instead asks, what am I meant to become? In Jungian psychology, individuation is the integration of your unconscious with your conscious self, the unification of all the lost, buried, rejected parts of who you are. And heartbreak, strangely enough, is one of the most powerful catalysts for this journey. Because when someone walks away, when love doesn't go the way you hoped, you are forced to meet the version of yourself that was hidden behind the hope, behind the fantasy, behind the need to be loved. And that version? She's raw, she's scared, but she's real. Jung warned that most people avoid this confrontation for as long as possible. They distract, they chase new love, they repeat patterns, they seek validation to cover the wound. But the few who pause, who dare to sit in the silence and look inward, they begin to discover something remarkable, that their worth was never in how much they were wanted. It was in how whole they could become on their own. Individuation is not a tactic. It's not a phase. It's a permanent shift in identity. When you begin walking this path, you stop trying to prove yourself. You stop obsessing over whether he still thinks about you. You start building, learning, healing. You start noticing things you didn't before, like the way your energy softens when you're not striving, the way your beauty radiates differently when it's not rooted in insecurity, the way your presence changes when you're no longer seeking permission to be enough. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this is what most women don't realize. When you start individuating, your energy becomes different. Not louder, not sexier, not more high value in the internet sense, but undeniably self-possessed. And men, especially those who once took you for granted, can feel it. Not consciously, but in their bodies, in their dreams, in their restlessness, because the version of you they left behind no longer exists. And that absence, that emotional void they can't quite name, begins to haunt them. But here's the truth. By then, you may not even care if they come back. Because individuation is not about becoming better, so he regrets losing you. It's about becoming whole, so you stop betraying yourself to be loved. You begin to protect your energy. You stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself. You no longer seek emotional scraps because you've remembered your own table. And ironically, that's when love finds you. Not the same love, not from the same place, but love that meets you at the level you've now claimed. So stop asking, "What can I do to get him back?" And start asking, "What part of me is asking for my own return?" You don't need a love strategy. You need the courage to come back home, to yourself. Because when you do, love may return. But this time, you'll be the one who decides. Part 4. When you're silent long enough, his unconscious starts speaking for you. Carl Jung taught us something quietly revolutionary. The unconscious is not just a storehouse of forgotten things, it is a living system of reactions, impulses, and instincts that speak when the conscious falls silent. And that, sister, is why your silence matters. You think you're doing nothing. You think your absence is invisible. But in reality, your silence is speaking in a language his conscious mind can't translate, yet his unconscious hears it clearly. Let's pause and really feel that. The moment you stop reaching out, the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop accidentally liking his stories, is the moment his psyche becomes the one doing all the talking. Not out loud, but internally, where it matters most. Because human beings are wired to complete unresolved stories. And when someone disappears without a closing scene, our mind doesn't rest. It writes endings, it fills blanks, it builds theories. This isn't manipulation, it's psychology. It's what Jung called the autonomous activity of the unconscious, where inner content begins to take shape when external input goes quiet. So what happens when you're no longer chasing? His unconscious starts asking questions. Where did she go? Why isn't she reacting? Has she moved on? Did I matter at all? These questions do not arise when you're still present. They do not surface when you're explaining your worth. They only awaken in the vacuum of your absence. Jung believed that the unconscious responds to contrast, and silence, especially after emotional availability, is the sharpest contrast of all. Think of it this way. He was used to your energy being predictable. He felt secure in your attention. He assumed you'd always be one message away. That certainty made his unconscious comfortable, and eventually, indifferent. But when that energy vanishes, the psyche senses a disruption, a disturbance in the emotional field, and in the absence of answers, it begins to invent them. This is where it gets powerful, because now, His own mind becomes the storyteller, and unlike you, who probably gave him kindness, clarity, and compassion, his unconscious gives him doubt, unease, restlessness. Why? Because projection reverses. Where you once projected love and hope onto him, now he begins projecting uncertainty onto you. Jung said, "Projection turns the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. And when he no longer sees you, he starts seeing what he fears you've become. Stronger, unbothered, desired by someone else, no longer available to him emotionally. Even if none of this is true, it feels true to his unconscious. Because you've stopped feeding him information, and now his own inner voice is the only narrator left. And this voice whispers louder than any words you could send. That's why silence isn't passive. It's psychological redirection. You're not asking for him to return. You're creating the internal conditions where he must decide whether the loss of your energy is bearable. Spoiler, it often isn't, especially if what he lost wasn't just a person, but a reflection of his value. You see, Jung taught that we fall in love not only with others, but with the version of ourselves that we see in their eyes. And when you withdraw, he loses that mirror. He doesn't just miss you. He misses who he was when he had you. And now, he starts trying to regain that version of himself. Not always consciously. Sometimes in subtle ways, likes, random messages, dreams, sudden concern. But here's the part that matters. By now you've grown. You've pulled back not to punish but to restore. You've stepped into your own path, not to provoke, but to realign. So when he reaches out, you'll feel it. That strange shift, where once you were the one waiting, now you're the one observing. Because when his unconscious speaks, it says the words you stopped saying. Come back. You mattered. I didn't see it then, but I feel it now. But the real question becomes, will you still want what you once begged for? Because silence doesn't just change him, it changes you. And sometimes when the unconscious finally speaks for the one who left, the woman he's calling out for no longer needs to answer, because she's already answered herself. Part 5. When you change from within, the energy you radiate will call him back. There's something no one tells you about healing. It doesn't whisper. It hums. It hums through your posture. It hums through your silence. It hums through the way you no longer ask to be seen, because now you see yourself. Carl Jung didn't believe in surface-level transformation. He spoke of inner alchemy, the process of turning emotional lead into psychological gold. And this alchemy happens in secret, not through grand gestures, not through public declarations, but in the quiet moments when you start choosing yourself in places you used to abandon yourself for love. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, Jung said. That's the work. Not to get him back, but to get back to you, to the woman you were before you bent, broke, and dimmed yourself to stay in someone else's orbit. And the deeper you go into that transformation, something starts to shift. Not just within you, but around you. People feel it. They don't always know what's changed, but they sense it. Your voice is calmer. Your gaze is sharper. Your presence is grounded. And this energy, this unspoken realignment, begins to vibrate at a different frequency. Jung taught that everything unconscious eventually becomes visible through symbols, patterns, and emotional resonance. When you heal your emotional wounds, your entire energetic field shifts, and the people connected to your past feel the disturbance. They may call it a gut feeling. They may say, "You crossed my mind." They may show up in your inbox with nothing to say, yet everything to feel. But what's really happening is this. Your new energy is unfamiliar to them. They feel the old version of you disappearing. And what replaces it is not just absence. It's a new presence, one that they no longer have access to by default. This is where resonance replaces pursuit. You're no longer chasing love, you're radiating clarity. You're no longer craving connection, you're embodying self-respect. You're no longer needing to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. And this, ironically, is the moment when his unconscious starts to respond. Not because you played games, not because you manipulated, but because energetic scarcity always wakes the sleeping psyche. He starts remembering things that never crossed his mind before. The way you made him feel seen, the safety of your presence, the way your love never asked him to become someone else, the way your light once reflected his value. But now, that mirror is gone. And Jung would say, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your absence forces him into his own darkness. Your glow, now distant, becomes a contrast he can't ignore. And slowly, the woman he once overlooked becomes a memory he can't silence. But here's what's most powerful. By now, you've outgrown the version of you he remembers. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer seeking closure. You're not watching his stories hoping he'll notice. You've built a life that no longer centers around whether or not he returns. And it shows in the way you speak, in the way you walk, in the way you no longer perform worthiness, you embody it. Because healing doesn't just make you better, it makes you different. And that difference is what disorients his unconscious. You are no longer the woman who begged. You are no longer the woman who explained. You are no longer the woman who settled. You are now a woman who radiates from within, and that kind of energy doesn't ask for love. It calls it, not with words, not with tactics, but with frequency. And when that frequency changes, everything changes. If he comes back, it won't be because you pulled. It will be because your transformation whispered to his soul. You left something sacred behind. And if he doesn't, you will already be so rooted in your own becoming that you'll understand something most never learn. That the point was never to bring him back. It was to bring you back, fully, quietly, completely. Because love doesn't return to where it's begged. It returns to where it is recognized. And now, you've finally recognized yourself. So here you are, not at the end of a love story, but at the beginning of a deeper one, the one between you and your truest self. Carl Jung never promised that healing would be easy. He only promised that it would be real. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. And yet, you've done it. You've sat in the silence. You've resisted the urge to chase. You've endured the ache of uncertainty. And instead of falling apart, you fell inward. That is the mark of a woman in transformation. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You didn't harden. You honed. And that shift, subtle, internal, powerful, is not invisible. It's felt. Maybe he feels it in the stillness of a night he can't sleep. Maybe he feels it when no one else understands him the way you once did. Maybe he doesn't know why, but something in him remembers. But the point of all this, it was never to make him remember you. It was to make you remember you. Because the woman who begged for love is gone. The woman who confused attention with affection, who waited for messages like they were oxygen, she has vanished. In her place now stands a woman who radiates self-knowledge, who no longer performs for love, but embodies it, who knows that being seen is not the same as being valued, and whether or not he returns, you no longer need to be chosen, because you already chose yourself. That was always the real victory. So when he finally realizes what he lost, when his unconscious starts calling your name, you will hear it. But this time, you will respond not with longing, but with discernment. Because once a woman becomes whole, she doesn't chase. She decides.